Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at CESJ.org. We were talking about the racial injustice. You were saying that peaceful organization is so important. That's the way Dr. King did it. And that's what we need here in 2020 is
Absolutely.
a large number of people to come together and to actually agree on something to, work toward. So I think it's good to be looking at racial injustices because it still is, I think, a symptom of the structural imbalance in our economic system. I think, the racial issues are more a symptom than a cause, and people are looking at it more like a cause. Would you agree that it's more of a symptom?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is, it's the inequality of opportunity that results in the whole concept of racism. If you think that other people are inherently inferior, they're going to be treated as things. You're not going to enable everybody from the time that they're children to become owners. You see, we look and I want to talk about racism, but we're looking at first an idea of a money system that would provide equality of ownership opportunity for every child from the time of birth, every woman, every man, equally. And that doesn't exclude today's rich. They would get an equal allotment of capital credit. An 18-year-old or a child born today in 18 years would be on the plan. It's all laid out on our website. They would have $18,000 of income, capital income, coming to them at age 18. And at 65, they would have 190,000 of capital ownership. By 65, where we're having problems of Social Security today, the average individual under the plan, looking at the growth that's taking place today. Now, we're not trying to say that you can't grow faster. Yes, you can without inflation. But in any event, we take it's something like $3 trillion is added in new capital formation each year. You see, and you divide the population into that, and it comes to about 12,000 a year. But then to be conservative, we said, well, let's just look at 10,000 for each. Well, by the time someone born today reached age 65, they wouldn't need Social Security. They'd get almost twice as much. As a matter of fact, a little bit more than Social Security. They'd get $88,000 of income, and they'd have $660,000 of assets. That's the average person. And we're trying to be conservative. Now, you see, so it's a different system. Now, let me bring it back to race. Stokely Carmichael was a friend. He was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we were friendly because he knew what I was trying to do to help. And so we had lunch one day. A man like Ivanhoe Donaldson was there with us. And I explained Stokely was a communist. So I explained the Kelso idea. It was a lunch. And so over the lunch, I explained the ideas and answered. He was a very smart fella, very articulate fella, known around the world. And he'd ask questions, and I'd answer the questions. And finally, he said, okay, Norm, I understand, but they'll never buy it.
Right.
And my answer to him was, Stokely, no revolutionary should ever make that statement.
Right.
They want you're questioning whether you're a true revolutionary. You see, the people. If Martin Luther King had become a champion, and he didn't, despite all that Virgil Wood was trying to do, he did not. What Stokely was saying is exactly what people who are capitalists, who think capitalism is a good system, would also say. Oh, they'll
Right.
never buy. In other words, they think that anything that if it's democracy, economic democracy, must be socialist. It is not. That
Right.
In order to have a democratic political system, what do we invent? We invented something called the vote. Well, then how do you have something equivalent with the economic system? You offer them the means to become owners, and that's the money system. And Kelso developed a new money system. These are not my ideas, but once you hear it, it becomes your idea.
Right. Well,
Not
especially,
exclusively.
most people I think can understand that the money system that we have right now is corrupt.
Correct.
It's evolved from something that was originally intended to be okay, pretty good. But they seem to find so many ways to make it unjust and empower the few and exploit the many. Would you agree that the way it does that right now, this flawed money system, one major flaw is that we're loaning money into existence for the wrong things?
I would say we're not loaning money to enable people to have equal opportunity.
Right.
I put it that way. The Federal Reserve policy, we could do everything that we would like to do with existing power of the Federal Reserve under the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Section 13.2 would permit that. But unfortunately, here's where the problem starts with a notion called reserves, and
Right.
that banks must keep 10% of everything deposited there, and they can make loans after that, but the loans only go to people who already have ownership, because somehow or other being an owner already entitles you to own. But as I said, the concentration of ownership is so bad that a handful of people around the world own more than most of the world.
Right.
A fraction of 1% own more than 90% of Americans. Something's wrong. You see, Kelso challenged this 10% reserve. He said it wasn't only him. There was an Irving Fisher who in 1935 called for 100% reserves. Well, what did he mean? Well, you could create money as long as it was going to be backed by something. He was introducing that as an idea, fractional, the 100% reserves as a way in which the Federal Reserve would have total control over the money system, and use it for productive to move out of the Depression. Prices were declining. So if you go to Wikipedia and look up the monetary policy, you'll see Irving Fisher mentioned, Milton Friedman mentioned, and I could talk if you want about the Kelso and exchanges with Nobel Prize winner. Both Milton Friedman. I studied under Milton Friedman's brother-in-law at Chicago in the Law and Economics program, and I was impressed with what I learned reading Friedman's book. This is all before Kelso, because he pointed out that a market system, and this is another element of the just third way, that a market system, you have four pillars of the just third way. You have the idea that everyone should have equal opportunity to become an owner, the democratization of opportunity. The next is private property. Private property is not the thing, is not a thing. It's how people would have power over, have a right to influence how that thing is used. In other words, a vote if it's a corporation. And also the right to the fruits. Well, right now, the owners of corporations don't get the full fruits. Well, under the Kelso idea, 100% of the profits would be used to enable people to get capital credit. That is, for the Federal Reserve or central bank to create enough money for financing all the growth, all the projected growth. As I mentioned, it was, say, if it's $3 trillion, well, you enable corporations to issue new shares that are voting, 100% dividend payout. In other words, all the profits would be deductible so they can escape from paying corporate taxes. But it would all flow to and become assets and income, and also additional income for spending purposes, for consumer, for being dealing with the consumption side of a market economy. You got production, you have to have consumption, and that's a market system. And there, Friedman was right. It's a market system is the most democratic way of determining value. But then Friedman was quoted in a Phil Donahue show as saying, "What's wrong with greed?" The guy couldn't tell the difference between moral virtue and moral vices. These are classical. This is the problem. People like Friedman rejected Kelso and never gave a reason.
He allowed the fractional reserve to continue, which is what you were just talking about, the 100% reserve idea.
Exactly.
The combination of fractional reserve with compound interest creates an entire system based on flawed math. Crashes are inevitable right now, so people
right.
are desensitized to the ups and downs, although they're devastating. And not only, these crashes seem to empower the super rich because they just snatch up everything when it's cheap, but also it allows them to be more in control of politics and information.
Exactly.
So basically, it's about concentrated ownership and the power that comes with it. But neither socialism or capitalism have done anything to change this power. So how would the Economic Democracy Act bring a totally different approach?
Right. Now, what Kelso said was he gave a definition of money, which I think everybody should understand. He said money is not the physical things that take place. Money is a yardstick for measuring the value of those inputs, the physical world. And then Kelso didn't give a full enough answer, because I later discovered he never said what that yardstick should be, and that's a problem. It's not gold or silver that should be the yardstick of value, because it used to be $20 an ounce. And then it went up to 30, and now it's, into the thousands. It's ridiculous, because if that's the case, that's one of the reasons why prices have gone up. When I was a kid, the minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. And now they're asking for $50 an hour.
Right.
What does that do? Why not $25 an hour? Why not $50 an hour? That's a wage system, and it's only part of the whole system. But if we're concerned with maximizing production and ability to market whatever can be produced in our nation throughout the world, you don't increase prices. Buckminster Fuller, one of the great world design scientists of the 20th century, suggested that you look at what's going to be needed throughout the world, and that's the price of a kilowatt hour. if you invent new and better non-fossil based energy systems that don't destroy health as the fossil fuels do, the prices will go down. Which who is going to benefit the most if you have a measure of value that goes down? The poor.
Right. That's true.
Price, you see, and that's very important if we're trying to provide equality of opportunity, that for those who are in the process of being able to become owners and receiving as a right of citizenship capital credit that will be based on a combination of what Kelso suggested and Fuller suggested. Now you have a way in which the central bank of the United States and the central bank of all other nation states would see that they could use money to produce in ways in which prices can go down, not up. Now, to me, that should be common sense. But again, that's not being taught, even though Irving Fisher suggested that. And there were some Chicago scientists, economists back many years ago, before I got there, who were thinking about these things. But Kelso came up and included it as an essential part of the money system. We have to first be able to define what money is, and I think by saying that it's a yardstick or for measuring value, but it is there as a lubricant. Capital credit is a lubricant. If you create the money so that everybody would have an equal opportunity to own the growth capital, as I pointed out, they would begin getting incomes. And then the whole notion of work. We have to rethink that. As Aristotle did, he said, when the looms learn to weave from themselves and the plectrum can play for itself, masters will no longer need servants or slaves. He was talking about a new approach, what he called leisure work. If you had an income, people would still need to work, but the system, academia, would be teaching them what's called Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Kelso talked about this as he's saying we have to move from urgent and the important. The urgent are the needs that we share with animals, survival and security. But then there's the important, are the human needs and the social needs, the political needs, and then what Maslow calls self-actualization. What's that? It's a new way approach to education, that you teach everyone to develop their faculties or work for the common good. You want to, whether you're going to do that as an artist or a musician or a politician or sports or many other activities, that if people had all the income, they would do things that they love to do, but it is for the dignity of all, the dignity of everyone, not for just the few. And that
That's
to
right.
me is beautiful, because that's the future of education. If we recognize that the schools, like the public education, I used to get through high school, and even my undergraduate work was in public education. I used to think that that was a great idea, public education. And the first job I had in the federal government as a lawyer was to provide a support for Jack Kennedy. He had just come in. I came in at the end of the Eisenhower administration, and Jack Kennedy was just coming in. And he had taken a position that you can't use no money for religious education, and kind of I thought about it. And I said, yeah, that's what I understand. And then if a good lawyer, when you have a challenge, you want to see what the other side has to say. Well, I'm not a Christian, but I read the Catholic lawyer's position, and that was that the family should decide, should have the means to, if it has the means to choose the place educated, that's going to be good, because
Right.
if there's, and it's going to improve the quality of education.
Well, if we
And so
empower
I took a position. I wouldn't write the memo because I
interesting.
thought it just didn't make sense on principle, even though I had to change my mind, just as Kelso
Right.
introduced me to. And I think we have to be open to that
Right.
for
But,
everybody.
it's a whole different way of looking at things. If we're empowering individuals with ownership and incomes, then you don't need a large state that is designating our wages. And
That's
really,
right.
all that does is empower the politicians and, the concentrated owners, and rather than empowering the people.
Right.
Also, like you say, education. There's so many areas where if you empower the individual, you would also be empowering families, because that's the next institution after
Exactly.
individuals.
Same
To
thing with health. You see,
right, absolutely,
that's where the ideas of socialism on the health system, when you can provide a means. We have plans, we have papers on how to have a health system which would be owned by the patients and the health providers. The central bank would provide the money for both, so you could have a corporation, competing corporation. You wouldn't be forced to go to a government entity. Rather, why not choice? Don't you believe in freedom as
right.
being important? So I think socialism is intended by socialists intend to do the right thing, but they're not thinking in terms of being fearful of monopolies. And the only legitimate monopoly is the state. All the others
But
should be choice.
any monopoly can get big and too controlling, and so there has to be checks on it.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about. If you empower the people with ownership, not only ownership of shares in dividend paying corporations, but also uh, an ownership stake in their regional Federal Reserve Bank. So,
Exactly. That's very important. That's
and that's
very
part of
important. That just as you have control over the monopoly called the state, that I think it's important for the central banking system to be controlled by the people, whoever's going to be in charge, so that you're sure that it's democratic in its nature. It does, that it sees the importance of providing equality of a monetary availability for people to become owners of the productive system, not
But we don't
have
even know
you.
what really goes on, in the operation of the Federal Reserve, because they're not accountable to us. But if we
Right.
owned it, then that it would be accountable to us. So this,
Exactly.
so just to review, Norm, the Economic Democracy Act is a specific plan for the Federal Reserve to provide an equal investment credit voucher to all citizens who participate, to be used to buy shares in dividend paying corporations. The corporations would access the investment credit through competitive banks that are part of the system, that are members of the Federal Reserve or customers of it. And those banks would evaluate the feasibility of new growth projects proposed by the corporations, which is just good banking. That's the way it's supposed to work anyway. And the
Well,
system would be transparent, because every citizen would become an owner of their regional Federal Reserve Bank. So tell me, how would this plan affect wealth disparity?
first of all, Dave, I would add something. I'm sure you meant to, and that is there's risk of failure,
Okay.
right? I mean, so if a company issues issues shares some of those. Maybe it's not well managed. It's they don't have customers for what they want to produce.
Right.
So there'll be failures. We know that you're not going to have anything that human beings do that
It's perfect.
will not have failure in the process. So we have to figure out how to do that. And so it's not just the bankers, but also independent insurance, capital credit insurance. So that would be a charge from the beginning for those that would be highly risky. They would not be feasible. They're called feasible investments, and so you don't want to just have people purchase things that are not going to pay for themselves, that are not going to generate profits. So that's a charge as a safeguard, as a way of helping the bank. So it's not, a little bit of the bank will be looking at feasibility, but it helps to have capital credit insurance. Whether it's done, I'd like to see the private sector do it, but the government did this for mortgage insurance after the Second World War, in order for returning vets to be able to buy homes. But
Right.
a home it doesn't pay for itself unless you're going to rent it out.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned these other things, like ventures that are not as feasible. We're not trying to put every transaction into this Economic Democracy Act box. There's
Right.
still the freedom of an individual to own a business, to have a speculative business, and have investors who have existing
Yes.
money they want to invest. We're not saying that everything has to be run this way, but we would also like to see the laws restrict the loaning of money into existence, and say that should no longer be used for government waste and speculation and consumer spending as it is today. How would that make a difference?
You see, we right now you have you're creating money for consumer debt. Well, what's happening is because people don't earn enough income, they use credit cards, not ownership cards, and so they get in over their head and they can't pay. But they can't pay the consumer credit that they have purchased because of the economy. If everybody had enough income, they would spend what their income is, and both from their economic work to the extent it's needed, and from their ownership, which is going to continue to increase because we continue to discover ways to do things that used to be done by people, but now we can do it with technology.
Right. And it would turn around the whole concept of money and banking from being exploitation into being empowerment. And that comes
Exactly.
back to something that I wanted to mention, not only empowerment of all people and addressing, disparities and the symptom of racial injustice, but let's go ahead and talk for a minute about the topic that people are mentioning right now, known as reparations. How can the Economic Democracy Act address that?
I'm glad you're posing that. It's a good question. Well, you see, what's happening is people are organizing. The Black movement is organizing to get money because there were people who received reparations. The Japanese Americans were thrown in camps on the West Coast, including my wife. You
Oh,
see,
wow.
yeah, and her mother, they were both born in America, and they were certainly, but in any event, and then a father and two brothers. So at some point, the government decided to, they were a little ashamed of that. and gave some money to those who were in the camps. Okay, they were personally their rights were personally violated by government. Well, you don't have that for the people who are saying, because we're descendants of slaves, we should get some money, and also Native Americans. Instead, we're saying another approach to reparations. And we have Gene Gordon organized what he called the Descendants of American Slaves for Economic and Social Justice, because the slaves were treated as things. They were abused. People owned their bodies, owned all the fruits that they produced. That was wrong. That was a sin. Okay. How do you deal with that? And of course, Native Americans were also treated the same way. If you weren't the right color or whatever it is, you were treated as inferior. Well, what Gene, he formed a group, and they're partners with CESJ now. And so if you go to his website, www.das in the number 4 and ESJ.org, you'll see Descendants of American Slaves for Economic and Social Justice. You'll see a beautiful statement. It's a great website to show that we should make America greater than it's ever been. Let's not attack America. Let's transform America into a true democracy, economic democracy, political democracy, enable everyone to have equality, a future ownership opportunity. That will solve the problem. And it's not just for us, it's for everybody.
We need reparations, but it needs to be a reparation of the whole system, because
repair the system. That's what he says.
We don't even have money to give to anyone because all of the money is fake. So if we fix the system, that's the right. repair that we need.
Right. And so you can, if you want to demonstrate and get people power, you have to be able to say everybody will benefit. By saying, oh, we're the only poor people. There are many, Oprah Winfrey is not poor, and some of the athletes of today, they're not poor. And there's some leaders, there are some, I think there's a couple of billionaires, but that's not the point. Let's look toward the future where everyone will have an equal opportunity. And that is true justice.
Right. And there's no doubt there are structural inhibitions for the average person who is in the African American community and growing up in the inner city. It's wrong the way that the system, is set up. But that's exactly why you have to change and get away from the concentrated ownership and the large government. The larger the government gets, the more liberties we lose. We think we have a conservative administration right now, but Snowden and Assange, who were trying to expose the corrupt things that the government were doing, they're still locked up and in hiding. We still have a very large, intrusive, oppressive government, and it gets more and more that way. And we don't want to empower that entity anymore with controlling and deciding who is the winner and loser. What we want to do is fix the system to help
everybody a winner.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
And as you were talking, I began to think of people who have passed away, who are some of the great people in my life, besides Kelso. One was a woman in Harlem when I worked for the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. I was brought there by the number 2 man in the Citizens Crusade. His name was Livingston Roy Wingate. he was the head of what was called the Central Harlem Council and Neighborhood Boards. And he also became a justice. He ran for Congress. Roy was a good guy, and I'd be talking about the Kelso ideas to him. And he was always a little bit cautious. And then when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and you had in 1968, you had riots in Harlem, and a lot of buildings were destroyed. And Roy said to me, Norm, why don't you come in and talk to the Central Harlem Council of Neighborhood Boards? It's half youth leaders and adult leaders, and we're trying to develop ways to make Harlem into a better place and solve the problems. Why don't you come in and speak? So anyway, I went there, and I started my talk, and I said, anybody in this room own those buildings that were burned down? And nobody says anything.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then I said, any of you expect to be the owners of the buildings that replaced them?
Right.
And people are silent. And Roy, is a lawyer, and he's getting a little nervous, and he expressed this nervousness. I said, well, but maybe that's all I have to say. And this woman, who was his right-hand person, and is Frances, who was one of the great people in my life, a true leader, she said, Norm, keep going. I want to hear this.
Yeah, keep going. I want to hear this. I want to own the buildings.
Well, she was a real leader, though.
Right.
She was for change. She was part of the Garvey movement. And in Africa, they named a hospital after her. But anyhow,
wow.
She became a member of the Institute for the Study of Economic Systems. She even testified before the Ways and Means Committee on Kelso's ideas.
Oh, that's great.
And she, unfortunately, she was campaigning for vice president in New Hampshire in the presidential primaries in 1979, and then she died.
Wow.
So that you lose a leader, that's very big, because we were very close, and to me, she was one, as I say, great. I had Kelso come in, speaking to Puerto Ricans in Harlem, in East Harlem. Puerto Rican gangs, criminal gangs came together to try to build a new system. They call themselves the Real Great Society. And so I brought Kelso in to talk to them. And you can, and you hear the gunfire out in the streets. And then he worked very closely, and he agreed he would help. And then I reached out to Bucky Fuller. I said, would you be willing to help work with the Central Harlem Council and Neighborhood? And sure enough, he agreed. He sent me an article, and he had already a plan for a rebuilding of Harlem.
Wow.
It appeared in a national magazine.
And then you guys had the same kind of proposal for St. Louis, and you had a leader there.
Exactly. This and that was also a Bucky Fuller. In 1972, I didn't know this at the time, but he had a plan for building a new city in one of the poorest cities in the country, East St. Louis, Illinois. And he was to build a new city that he called Old Man River City, and he had the design. And anyway, Bucky died. But Yvette Young was another great leader. She was the state representative representing that area of Illinois, former civil rights lawyer, she and her husband. Wonderful. Dawn went out to a conference in Illinois, and she and Roland, who are of course with us, met with Yvette and said a few things about what we're trying to do. And so she said, "Oh, I like that." And so I started working with her from, let's see, that was 1998, I think it was. And I worked with her till about 2008. And I'd go out there, and we brought people in from Virgil Wood and others from all over the country to work to build a new city. We had NASA power technology people were going to introduce a new energy system. They would take the brownfield and get methane out of that to feed into the new energy system. And then I had one of the top architects in the country who my wife worked with at Georgetown University. Dean Price was his name. He designed the whole, and we had a team there. Wyvetter had me testify before the state House committees, and we developed what we called Citizens Land Development Cooperative, in which all the land in East St. Louis and the surrounding communities would all become owned by the permanent residents who were there now and would come in after the city, that is the Old Man River City, would be built. And we had Bucky's two, even though he had passed away, we had his two partners, and they were going to help design, because we had the plans, Bucky's old designs, and
Right.
it would have been a dome city, a very interesting concept right across the river. So we proposed the specific laws that would be necessary to do that, and I testified on that, and it passed by the Illinois House by a vote of 114 to 0. In other words, a unanimous vote.
That's great.
Yeah, okay. So that was the idea. We met with the Federal Reserve people and the St. Louis Fed. We were planning to try to institute Kelso's financing plan. Anyway, Wyvetter died before we could get the Senate to pass it. And as a result, nothing has happened there. But the good thing is that people across the river, like Gene, want to build a new St. Louis using the same concept where the citizens could own the land.
Right.
And then have the Federal Reserve be able to provide the money for building an improved city.
And these energy companies that would be developed would be for-profit entities, and these
Absolutely.
citizens in the area would actually receive dividends from the function of the energy company, basically.
And participate in the planning. They'd have a voice.
Right.
You see, and then they would receive dividends. You're right, because to the extent that some of the land would be used for industrial or infrastructural purposes, there would be dividend incomes that could
Right.
flow from
Yeah.
the development of the community.
And
So you could build new cities, whole new cities around the country or around the world. So these ideas are Kelsonian and Fuller. See, I look and here are the leaders that I see. So it's not, these are not my ideas, but it's a combination of people. You got Kelso, Mortimer Adler, who has great books. He used to teach the philosophy of law at the University of Chicago before I got there, I mentioned. And then you have Father Ferree on social justice. And then you have Bucky in terms of the physical. Bucky concept was to create a system where everybody would benefit. Make the world work for 100% of humanity, Bucky said, in the shortest possible time, with spontaneous cooperation and without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. That's in his book. and
absolutely.
so Bucky had a vision. And then Martin Luther King, in terms of people power, peaceful people power. And then there was even one other person who most people today don't know, but it was Gary Davis, He was a Broadway star,
And then he
and
was a
Gary during
soldier in
the
World War II.
World War II, he was a bomber pilot, and he
Okay.
got so disgusted with himself. His brother had been killed, but when he was dropping bombs in Dusseldorf and other cities, he became so ashamed. Why kill civilians? You
Right.
see, Einstein was in back of him, and French scholars Sartre and Camus were. They had all kinds of people in France because he decided to declare himself a world citizen, and he formed what he called the World Government of World Citizens. Gary is still known around the world by people who are promoting world government. Well, when he came to Washington, returned to Washington, actually, because that's where he was born in the 70s, and I met with him, and I said, well, there's nothing that I would fear more than world government unless you had an economic or a monetary system that would provide equal ownership opportunity so government's role would never be a threat, but it would be a way to end war. And
Yeah.
so, and he wrote an article in a book. Oh no, the article was called "Who Owns the World," which is on our website in the article section, and you'll see that he understood what Kelso and I were saying. So I feel that we have done something that's available, but we don't have leaders today of that caliber that I know of. But I hope that what you're doing, Dave, I think your show is the most important. I know that you're interested in the free markets and being in business. And that's a good idea because I think you'd be a great businessman. But I frankly think a person like you, that's what we need, politicians who are libertarian in their outlook.
Yeah.
And
Smaller government and empowering the people.
that's right.
Just as
It,
important as the podcast is what Gene is doing with the das4esj.org. And I
I
encourage people
agree.
there because we are at a point here in 2020 where something is going to change. And if it could be widespread ownership of productive capital, then we would actually be doing something really constructive to make a significant change in the right direction. And I
Right.
guess we can wrap it up there. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we close it out?
I think we've really covered enough for a book.
It's always good to tap into your wisdom and the amazing history behind everything that you're doing and have done. And I think people can listen to your story in these podcasts and realize that there was an opportunity so many times for the world to go in the right direction and take good leadership and like the peaceful people power of Dr. King, and
Right.
they just focused on the wrong things and allowed the concentrated ownership to continue, but it's never too late, so we can turn it around.
Exactly. And the thing is what see, I think we can change Russia. I think we can change China. We've had talks where some people in the Communist Party of China, they need a new money system. And you
Yes,
see, and this would bring America together with in a new it's a new system. You just have to see the weaknesses of capitalism and the weaknesses of socialism and communism, where they do tend to concentrate power, and power tends, as Lord Acton said, tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
that's
Thank you
right.
very much, Dave, for being for the conversation with you.
I'll also mention that Mike Graney writes the Just Third Way blog, and people can check that out for more background on this history. And
Good.
uh, he is a amazing, I guess you would say, historian of money. He knows how everything happened the right and wrong way throughout history, but it's JUST3, the number 3, and then RDWAY.blogspot.com. So Just Third Way blog. Mike is there and helping us set things up, and we thank him for that. And of course, Dawn is communications director, and we always appreciate everything she's doing, and we'll probably talk to her again soon.
She's also co-authoring with Mike the new book, which is on economic personalism.
We need that book. We really do. I'm going to get some copies and distribute them, and I hope everyone else will do the same. And with that, I guess we'll sign off, and thank you again, Norm, and have a great day.
And I hope everyone who hears our talk also has a great day and a great future by working together for justice. Thank you, Dave.
Absolutely. You can join CESJ by going to cesj.org and clicking on participate, and you can become a paying member for $25 per year, and also a student membership is $15 per year, and that qualifies you for discounts on our materials such as books, which you can buy many of and distribute to your friends and family. And also, if you'd like to participate and comment on the podcast, feel free to call. I have a voicemail set up. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll play it on the podcast. The number is 678-719-2840. Own or be owned.